With the way Jujhar Khaira is playing in the preseason, it looks like this will be another veteran-heavy lineup for the Minnesota Wild in 2023-2024. Where's the youth movement? We will discuss that and more on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, this is Brandon Duham, and this is Locked on Wild.
Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes throughout the course of the week. On today's episode, we're going to dive into the veteran and youth balance by taking a look at the options for 13th forward, as well as whether or not the rookies that are currently on the team are put in positions to succeed. My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and as the Wild took care of business in their preseason game earlier tonight against the Colorado Avalanche, 4-2, I will throw the caveat out there that it is really hard to put meaningful discussion and observation into games that are not on TV, especially if you're not there covering in person. And so while Kirill Kaprizov scored a couple of times, Vinni Lettieri had a goal as well. I'll have a chance to see what this team looks like come Saturday against the Chicago Blackhawks. Also, the fact that the Colorado Avalanche really didn't bring much of their regular lineup to XL Energy Center for this one. And so it's a situation where you can say, yeah, particular Wild players looked good while they were out there on the ice, but who are they really playing? And so we're trying to just talk out some of the frustrations about the situation that young players have been put in on this Wild team over the last couple of seasons, because it looks like, based off of how things have been going, that the 13th forward spot is probably going to Jujhar Khaira, uh, just based off of what he's done in the preseason. And so that means that, depending on the injury situation with this team, that he'll probably be one of the first players called up to fill in, depending on who's hurt. Now, if it's a player who is banged up, say Marcus Johansson or Marcus Foligno, obviously two very different players. And so it looks like Khaira will probably be the 13th guy. Vinni Lettieri, though, certainly figures to factor in to the equation as well. But this pushes names such as Adam Beckman and Sammy Walker further down the list, which creates some frustration because this is a team, a Wild team, that over the next couple of seasons is going to be extremely hamstrung. Finances are tight. There is a razor thin margin for this team to be operating under this season, which means that if this team puts themselves in position for a postseason run, it's likely that there is not going to be any sort of meaningful acquisitions at the trade deadline. It means that this team at home, unless absolutely necessary, will not be carrying a 13th forward. It means that you're going to see what you see essentially is what you're going to get. And you've got a bunch of veterans on this team. You have players who are going to be impending free agents, Matt Zuccarello, Ryan Hartman, Marcus Foligno, amongst others. And so it's kind of a what gives. If we just have all these guys that are on this roster, why not give some opportunities to young players to be able to step up and to see what they have, because if you don't have money to spend in the offseason, you're better off getting a head start on this so that next year you can fill a lot of those spots with particular players that have already had a chance to get experience at the NHL level. Well, as it looks right now, those that are hoping for that outcome, hoping for the better good with the kind of why just go through the motions the next 2 seasons without getting a chance to see, a full chance for a guy like Sammy Walker, a chance for a full season for a guy like Adam Beckman, amongst others. Give them full opportunities to just see what you have, full evaluation. Well, that's just not how the combination of Bill Guerin and Dean Evison are wired. And so those that are hoping for that to happen this season, if you're looking for the earliest in which we would see that, the scenario would be if the Minnesota Wild are not in postseason contention by the trade deadline and want to try to get something in return for those 3 impending free agents that were mentioned, plus a couple of other players that are impending free agents as well. Trade deadline is probably going to be the earliest that we see any of that, if that's what you're looking for this season. In reality, it looks as though this is going to be a mostly veteran team this season, with the exceptions being Marco Rossi, Calen Addison, and Brock Faber. Now, confidence maybe not necessarily inspired based off of things that we've seen over the past couple of seasons in regards to how rookies have been handled, in regards to how particular players that are going to be on this year's team have been handled, notably last year. So I get the frustrations that are being raised, the calls for why does the lineup look the way that it does? Why are we seeing a player like Marco Rossi on a line that should be utilized more for defense purposes? And so we're just going to try to talk the why out. I'm going to put my thoughts, how I see things out there, and free reign in the comments to tell me I'm out of my mind or to express, we're going to treat this as kind of a safe space. Let it out if you have something that is on your mind as we near the eve of the regular season that you want to see. Why aren't we seeing this? We're just going to talk out the possibilities and just try to kind of get a better sense as to where youth fits in on this current Minnesota Wild roster. So we'll start with the potential for call-ups, and we will then finish the show by looking at the position that the likes of Rossi, Addison, and Faber, the spots that they're in, and see if they are being put in a good position to succeed. So that's all coming up on today's show. We will start by looking at the potential for the 13th forward and call-ups as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is nothing better than on a college football Saturday or an NFL Sunday pulling up the DoorDash app, ordering your favorite food from your favorite restaurant, and without having to get up off the couch, paying for said food, and having it delivered directly to your door. What if I told you DoorDash now gives you the ability to order your groceries without even changing out of your pajamas? Love the convenience of getting what you want right to your door? With DoorDash grocery delivery, you can stock up for the week or order last-minute cravings conveniently. You've trusted DoorDash to deliver your restaurant favorites, and now you can get grocery delivery that actually delivers too. With easy substitutions right in the app and best-in-class customer support, DoorDash delivers groceries exactly how you want them. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use code LOCKED at checkout. Limited time offer, terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and zero delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter code LOCKED. Don't forget, that's code LOCKED for 50% off of your first order with DoorDash. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we'll be joined by Ben Gislason of the Iowa Wild to talk about the upcoming season for Iowa. First year under new head coach Brett McLean. We'll talk about the new vision for the team and some of the players to watch for this season in Iowa. That's coming up on tomorrow's episode of Locked on Wild. So I mentioned off the top of the show, it seems as though Jujhar Khaira is putting himself in position to be, if there is one, a 13th forward. But with the fact that this Wild team has $43,000 in cap space, which for an NFL franchise is like a crumpled up $1 bill. With the fact that that is what the Wild have rolling into the season, we're not going to see a 13th forward unless absolutely necessary for this team. And so I think that will probably be an emergency only basis, especially at home. Now, on the road, sure, you may see a forward come in to join the team and potentially slot into the lineup if it's absolutely necessary. But there just isn't money available for this team to lean on that position. And we've seen this over the last couple of years. It's nothing new. Bill Guerin he did it last year, and he will do it again this year, where the 12 guys on offense are going to be the 12 guys on offense for a majority of the season until players get hurt, which it seems logical that if Marcus Foligno gets hurt or if Pat Maroon gets banged up, that Jujhar Khaira steps in to fill that spot. Vinni Lettieri, another guy who brings a little more speed to the game than, say, Jujhar Khaira does. Vinni Lettieri then will probably be next off of the list to hop up, and a player that I would say could be circled as potential insurance would be Marcus Johansson, who, according to some reports from Michael Russo and Joe Smith, was banged up a few times in the preseason game against the Dallas Stars, but it sounds like he got out of it okay. Vinni Lettieri would be the guy who will likely fill in the event that Marcus Johansson misses any time this season. Now, long-term injury situations are kind of their own category, but the fact that those two have been signed to two-way deals, less money than the likes of Sammy Walker and Adam Beckman, means that those are going to be the two guys that you likely see throughout the course of the season. And frustrating, yes, because we've seen Sammy Walker in previous opportunities with the NHL club. We've seen him look the part. And so why he wouldn't be given the opportunity, it's the two in front are not flashy in particular. Sammy brings the sizzle and brings plenty of skill with him to the NHL level. And so I get the frustration with why is it not going to be Walker? Because then you look too at where you're filling in the lineup. Let's say Marcus Foligno's out. You could have potential to put somebody with some skill on a line with Marco Rossi and Freddie Gaudreau, and you'd probably have yourself a pretty decent combo there in that third pairing. More on Rossi in a bit, but it comes down to financials for this team. Unless someone is moved off the roster, there just isn't the room to bring those players up, and that was done by choice. Didn't have to sign Jujhar Khaira or Vinni Lettieri per se earlier in the offseason. That was done by choice. And so those will be the guys, unless someone gets put on longer term injured reserve or is going to be out for a considerable amount of time. That then would be where we see the likes of a Sammy Walker and Adam Beckman on and on down the list. But unless that situation arises, it's going to be those 14 guys that get spots on the offensive side of the puck. Now, it's pretty clear cut on the defensive side of the puck too. Is you've got your top 4 starters in Spurgeon, Middleton, Brodin, Faber, and the third line is some combination of Calen Addison, Alex Goligoski, and John Merrill. So if one of those, any of those 6 get hurt, the 7th slots in. So the need to carry another defenseman really does not exist at this point unless injuries really take a toll on the blue line for the Minnesota Wild. And so you won't see any additional defensemen brought up to fill spots unless absolutely critically vital to do so. Goaltending, same thing. It's Philip Gustafson, it's Marc-Andre Fleury. Those will be the 2 guys you see pretty much all season. And so we talk about the timeline for this team. 2 years ago, they got that influx of cash after buying out Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. They got that influx of instant cap money to help them to that season. That money evaporated last season and was a slight loss in salary cap. This year, it's the full bore. Next year, it's the full bore. And so this becomes the season in which the potential for step back is greatest, because there's nothing that you can really do to influx the roster from a other NHL player standpoint. You don't have money to pull people in. And so this becomes the season in which, if this team is out of it at the trade deadline and offers come in on particular players, that you'll likely see them go. And so it's going to be a quick turnaround then. If you want to fully contend in 2025, 2026, with Kirill Kaprizov having 1 year left on his deal before he could sign a new one. And so this is, I think, where a lot of the desires to see the young players come from, is having a bunch of guys on the roster that are younger, playing for 1 year, and then making a determination as to, okay, we got to fill this spot, we got to fill this spot, we got to fill this spot, we got to fill this spot. That's a tight corner to turn. And so we will see how it plays out as the season unfolds, but this is the start. Everybody looking for the youth movement, this is the start of it, and we will see more of it expedited as the season unfolds. Now, the current young players that we are going to see for a good majority of this season, are they being put in good positions to succeed? We'll talk about that as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. And once again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we will be at Saturday's preseason game against the Chicago Blackhawks. And we will have a live postgame for you, unveiling a little bit of a new format for those. More interactive. Denny, looking at you. More interactive for our postgames here this season. So be on the lookout for that coming up Saturday night after the preseason. Now, I just spent time talking about how it's hard to really pull anything from preseason results because half the lineup's not playing. The other team might not bring their full lineup either. But we're going to do our best, and we're going to get ready for that that interactive angle that we'll have throughout the course of the season. So look for that. We'll have it on this channel as well as probably our other social media channels. That's still getting ironed out. So we'll discuss all that and we'll give it a whirl on Saturday. But let's just run through and look at the spots in which the current young players are being put in the lineup. Starting with Marco Rossi, third line, with likely Marcus Foligno and Freddie Gaudreau. Now, as has been noted by many, Rossi's looked good this preseason. He has had a little bit more of that fire, that grit that is thrown around by this team, and so it'll be interesting to see how he handles that third line spot because, as many have discussed, you're not really giving him playmakers on that line. You're giving him guys who are more known for their defense. And so, honestly, I think the reason that Rossi is being put there is to avoid what happened last year, which makes no sense because it's basically the exact same situation that he was put in last season. Low spot in the lineup and a situation where he kind of has to do it himself on that line. If Rossi shows that he is capable of doing the other things that are asked of him that are not on offense, I think a promotion will be happening at some point within the first portion of the season. It also depends on if the top six makes it through healthy, because he's a pretty logical candidate to hop up in the lineup if Ryan Hartman gets hurt, if Joel Eriksson Ek gets hurt. There's been a lot of pointing to putting him on a line with Matt Boldy and Marcus Johansson and letting those guys be your second line and putting Joel Eriksson Ek on the first line with Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Zuccarello. And then having your third line be Freddie Gaudreau, Ryan Hartman, Marcus Foligno, which I think would be fine. I think that would be a great third line. I don't see a scenario in which we see that happen unless absolutely necessary. It's pretty clear cut that Ryan Hartman is going to be the top line center for this team with Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Zuccarello when healthy. Joel Eriksson Ek, Matt Boldy, and Marcus Johansson is going to be your second line when healthy. And so there's not a ton that we can do about that, those that want to see Rossi in a better spot to succeed. There's not a lot that can be done about that until players start to get hurt. And then it's where does he end up in those situations? Does he go to the second line? Does he go to the top line? We'll find out. And so for Rossi right now, show the coaching staff that they're making a mistake by putting you lower in the lineup is about the best thing that can happen. And look comfortable out there. Don't look overwhelmed. Take care of your business and hope that the rest will work itself out. That's about the best I can do in terms of trying to will a guy higher in the lineup. Unless there is an opportunity that opens via injury or via slump, via having something similar to last year happen again, then yeah, you're going to give him an opportunity in that top six to see if he's got the capability to handle it. Because guess what? After the season is done, you're going to have a top line center spot potentially open. You're going to have a top line right wing spot potentially open. You're going to have opportunities in that top six to fill. And so if Rossi can take hold of one of those top six spots this season and go into next year with that, that would be, I think, the desirable outcome. And so I'm not gonna I'm not going to pencil that in until we have a chance to see it play out. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Just trying to kind of talk through what we will be seeing here early on. Now, from a Brock Faber standpoint, yes, you're going with the top four that is very defensive inclined and a bottom pairing that is really not. And so putting Brock Faber in a situation to where you spread the defense out a little more makes sense. We're getting Jonas Brodin and Brock Faber. And so the mindset here is allowing Faber time to develop throughout the course of the full season, see what it's like to play full-time NHL defense, and to have Jonas Brodin watch his back. Because there have been a couple of instances over the preseason. Again, take stock in them as you will, but you don't have to. There have been a couple of instances in which Faber has tried to pinch and has been on the wrong end of it. So having Jonas Brodin to be able to watch his back is something that this coaching staff wants to ensure that Faber gets through this season unscathed. But then why are we not extending the same level of courtesy to to Calen Addison? You're leaving him on a third line with Alex Goligoski, who's fine in pinches, but is really not a full-time NHL defenseman. And then you've got John Merrill in that pairing as well. And so it is fascinating that you get one end of the spectrum with Brock Faber, and you're saying, we understand that there will maybe be some hiccups here and there. And so we want to try to mitigate that by putting you with Brodin. All we hear with Calen Addison is, well, it's got to get better on defense. Got to get better on defense. I mean, Matt Dumba wasn't adept defensively either. And we stuck him with Jonas Brodin and had no problems with it. So I don't know. We're going to get some version of Addison, Merrill, Goligoski as the third pairing. We'll find out. We'll see how that works. And so I guess my entire point with this episode tonight in balancing youth with veterans is that this team is still tilted towards the veteran side of the coin, but that it's only going to continue as this team wins. If the wins start to dry up, that's then where the step back happens. If this team falls from 46 wins this year to somewhere right around 500, falls out of a postseason spot, then you will get the opportunity to see the likes of Sammy Walker, of Adam Beckman, of other guys for the rest of the season, and you build off of that going forward. And so we've got, a couple weeks before the regular season kicks off, and so we'll see how much of the rest of this puzzle starts to solidify itself for the regular season opener against the Florida Panthers. That will do it for today's episode of Locked on Wild. Now that you're finished listening to today's episode, again, make sure you check out tomorrow's episode with Ben Gislason of the Iowa Wild. We'll talk about what to expect from the Iowa Wild this season under new head coach Brett McLean. You can find all of our podcasts on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms. Make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes or any Minnesota Wild information. We've got you covered all week long. You can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.